1 week from today, the House gets its turn to grill Wells Fargo CEO John Stumpf about bogus customer accounts. Stumpf was blasted by senators earlier this week for his handling of the scandal. Joining us from Capitol Hill is House Financial Services Chairman Jeb Hensarling, who is holding that hearing. We should note that Strategist's Jason Schreiner is also joining in. It's great to have you with us. You know, we got to ask what you want to hear from John Stumpf that we haven't heard yet.
Well, there are two bodies in Congress. We represent the House. We have to get to the bottom of this. I mean, what appears to be obvious is that 2 million Americans just got ripped off by their bank and they got let down by their government. And so I'm not sure that Mr. Stumpf had all the answers. We are giving him now. He's got over a full week to prepare, to go back, to do his homework. We have launched a full investigation in the House Financial Services Committee that I chair. We will be interviewing witnesses ahead of time. We have demanded documents from Wells Fargo, from the Office of Comptroller of the Currency, from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So hopefully we can have a more thorough, in-depth hearing and start getting some answers to the American people because, you know, theft is theft, fraud is fraud, and I think a lot of people want to know, why was the story broken by an LA Times reporter years and years ago, and only now have our regulators seemingly caught it? And so I hope that the regulators will cooperate in the investigation as well, because as of today, I don't know if they need a pat on the back or a swift kick on the backside.
Congressman, do you hold the regulators as accountable for this as Mr. Stumpf? Because they were effectively, as you point out, sleeping on the job as well.
Well, that's what it appears to be, but unfortunately, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is impeding our investigation. They are very quick to write press releases. I just don't know how competent they were on the job. The bottom line is you had two primary regulators, the CFPB and the OCC. And they had various teams to examine Wells Fargo. They had agents that were embedded at Wells Fargo. And so the question is, why did it take a newspaper to break the story and the LA city attorney to really investigate it? And so I want to get the information, but so far the CFPB in particular has been stonewalling our investigation, and we don't know why. So that suggests more questions than answers. Counterintuitively and shockingly, we're getting more answers from Wells Fargo than we are from the government agents.
Okay, Congressman Hensarling, I've got some news on Wells Fargo that is just breaking right now, actually, so you'll forgive me for the audience. I'm going to be looking down because I got to read you this letter that we just got from the United States Senate. That is, they're asking the Labor Department to open an investigation into whether Wells Fargo has violated the Fair Labor Standards Act with regard to a number of employees. They're talking about the aggressive sales quotas. That's their term. Aggressive incentives, again, their term. And this is their quote: staggering neglect by management of the obvious consequences to consumer of those quotas and incentives. So we're getting this from, I believe, the office of Senator Elizabeth Warren, asking the Labor Department to open up an investigation into Wells Fargo. Again, just crossing your reaction to that. Would you support that kind of an investigation?
Well, we're launching an investigation already. My committee doesn't have jurisdiction over the Department of Labor, and so we know there are investigations with the OCC, with the CFPB. The bottom line is, in all probability, there are going to be both civil and criminal penalties assessed here somewhere. I mean, we have 24 major consumer protection laws that are on the books. And again, fraud is fraud, theft is theft. We want to make sure they're enforced. Whether DOL has any jurisdiction here, I don't really know. It's not an agency that, again, my committee has jurisdiction over. But we have to get to the bottom of this. I mean, my Lord, opening false accounts is fraud. We don't know how consumers were harmed. They got their credit scores may have been dinged. It could have been that monies were robbed out of one account to pay another account. I mean, that's basic theft. And how this could happen over so many years with so many different employees without somebody up the food chain not knowing it or doing a nod, nod, wink, wink, it just Absolutely shreds credibility.
Yes, I think most people would agree with you, Congressman. At the same time, you know, Senator Warren has been very explicit and very taken the hard stance when it comes to the CEO's role, saying that he should face criminal prosecution. You mentioned criminal prosecution as well. We're saying that in conjunction with the CEO. You mentioned the regulators, though. Not only did they not figure this out until an LA Times reporter broke the story a few years ago, but they also didn't do anything in the few years until today. Will we see commensurate sort of blame placed on them, and will they face similar sort of outcomes as a CEO? If we can say the CEO should be criminally prosecuted, what happens with these regulators who are completely asleep on the job for years?
Well, it's an excellent point, and regrettably, there are two standards. There are standards for we the people, and then there's standards for Washington elites. I mean, this is not the first time we've seen incompetence, not the first time,
so
frankly,
nothing
we've
can
seen
be done about these regulators
officials,
except maybe a tap on the hand?
I hope so. We have to launch our full investigation. We have to get the facts first, but they need to be held accountable. Again, it just begs credibility.
Will heads roll in Washington,
take...
Congressman? Will heads roll in Washington over this?
I'm trying to make them roll right now. I have to get the data. I'm not going to convict anybody by headlines, including the heads of our regulatory agencies. But what I do know is, in particular, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, right now, as we speak, as we do this interview, has not given the documents that we have demanded. But unfortunately, they are insulated. They have been insulated from congressional oversight, which is one of the reasons our committee has passed something called the Financial Choice Act to make sure that they are held accountable, that they don't make laws, they enforce laws, that they're put on budgets, so they have to be accountable to the people's elected representatives. And then also in our law, we increase fines and penalties for fraud and deception. So that's part of the answer in dealing with Wells Fargo. And last but not least, in our legislation, we ensure that they never qualify, they or any other Wall Street-like bank, for a taxpayer bailout.
Okay,
and so
again,
that's how we're addressing.
Again, I'd like you to comment on this breaking news about this letter, by the way, and you'll forgive me, I've been looking down, I've been reading it, Melissa. It's a 5-page letter. It comes from 8 senators. So Warren, Sanders, Jack Reed, you got a number of others that are in there. Here's another passage from this letter, again, Congressman, asking the Department of Labor to open up a Fair Labor Standards Act investigation into Wells Fargo. Any such investigation should include a comprehensive inquiry into whether Wells Fargo aggressively skirted overtime laws, failing to pay overtime to bank tellers and associates who stayed later, came in on weekends to meet their sales goals, or misclassifying salaried bank associates as overtime exempt. It also talks about this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau settlement and knocks it, Congressman, and knocks it by saying it does not even include an admission of guilt. So there's part of the letter, and my question, I guess, to you is, how does a, quote, outraged CFPB, the government, right, which has crowed, to your point, about this investigation, despite it really being an LA Times thing, not even get an admission of guilt by Wells Fargo in their settlement? How does that happen?
I don't know. That's one of the reasons we are going to have hearings. It's one of the reasons we've launched a full investigation. And frankly, the story's even worse than that. And what the CFPB did in their settlement is they essentially waived all these other consumer protection laws that otherwise Wells could have been held accountable on. And again, we have to get all the facts, but there are potential violations, for example, in the Truth in Lending Act, the Truth in Savings Act, the Electronic Transfers Act, and instead they concentrate on only one violation, and the CFPB waives everything else. As you put, they don't have an admission except tacitly by firing 5,000 people and making a public apology. It almost seems like Wells has already admitted guilt in the first place. So, again, we have to make sure that the laws are fairly and vigorously enforced, and it appears that the federal government, the OCC, and the CFPB have been asleep at the switch. I invite them to cooperate with our investigation and let us know. If they have bragging rights, we'll acknowledge them, but the American people just can't believe if the story was broken 3 or 4 years ago and the conduct's been known for 4 or 5 years ago, why is action only now happening? And they haven't lost their ability to be outraged. I haven't lost my ability to be outraged.
Last question, then we'll let you go. What's your sense of where we are in this whole Wells Fargo investigation? Or what inning do you think this is?
Well, yes, baseball season is still going on, although I'm more of a football fan. But my guess is, using the baseball analogy, we're probably only in the third inning. There's lots more to go here.
Right.
And we're only starting our investigation now and having the first hearing with Mr. Sump next week on Thursday.
Got it. Congressman, we appreciate your time.
Sure.
Congressman Jeb Hensarling of Texas.